for being here with us, Howard. I'm looking forward to this one. Howard has such good books on the subject, so this should be a really good show.
Well, I'm psyched to be here myself. Thank you.
Now, how did you come to follow the two most bootleg bands in history, and why are these guys so bootlegged?
Wow, that's a good question, and it's a fairly long answer, but I'll try to keep it brief. I got into the Grateful Dead like in 1981, right after John Lennon's death. It was like a downturn in the music world. All the great FM bands were kind of in a slump. And then there was this amazing band, Grateful Dead. They had a whole archive of music. Incredible. You could get lost in there for years. And I happened to get lost about 5-6 years. It was amazing, and it was like everything I wanted out of the band. Then all of a sudden, I borrowed my friend's car, put in a tape, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was listening to Blood on the Tracks. Wow, it blew my mind. It's like I knew Dylan, I knew Like a Rolling Stone, I knew Hurricane, I knew all the hit songs, but when I heard Blood on the Tracks, I realized this guy was so much more. He was a genre unto himself, like the Grateful Dead. And I just got into both of them so much. There was finally something kind of equal to Grateful Dead was. 30 years later, I'm sitting here. Those are still my two prime musical inspirations. I love all kinds of music, but whenever I do anything,
Now, in your book, Dylan and the Dead, I found like so many tidbits, even for somebody I've listened to Dylan since I'm 15 years old, and I date myself telling you I'm 52, so I've listened to him, I think, almost every day during that time period, and I found some really interesting things in your book. Now, you go a lot into the Never-Ending Tour, but after Dylan had that motorcycle accident, supposed motorcycle accident, or whatever happened, maybe you can clue us in, why did he, it looked for a while there like he might never tour again. What was going on with all of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting, whole interesting time period. I mean, Dylan had the greatest, most, wildest ascent to fame. It all became too much for him. He was huge. He was the guy who influenced the Beatles, and he did a lot of touring, and he just accomplished so much in a short time. And he had so much on his plate, and then he had this motorcycle accident, which he did have the motorcycle accident. What exactly the damages were, we don't know, but he recovered. But it was something. It was a necessary break for Dylan. He needed it. If he had to invent a motorcycle accident, he probably would have had to save his life. But then he took a 7-year break from touring, and just concentrated on trying to live a normal life. Write some songs, make some music. But he needed to get away from that brilliant rush of creativity and fame. He wanted fame. He came to New York. He was like, I'm here. It's my destiny. But he got too much of it. It's incredible. It's an incredible story. He got too much fame, and he had to take a break from it. And the motorcycle accident gave him that little pause where he could change his life and try to lead a normal life.
I just have to go in a little deeper because I think it fills out his story later. You said it possibly, I'm just paraphrasing you, but it possibly saved his life. What kind of pressure was he under? I know that lifestyle, involves a lot of drugs, a lot of heavy touring from city to city, people, adulation. What kind of, and I know he was in the movie Don't Look Back, said he had 80 more shows to do at one point, when he was talking with Grossman. So what kind of pressure was this guy living under?
Yeah, no, there was a ton of pressure. First off, he's getting booed like crazy at all his concerts. He's trying to keep a band together, just trying to play music. And people, they just had like crowds just sitting there waiting to boo him. And he was doing a frenetic pace. I mean, in 3 years, he wrote probably the 3 greatest albums in rock and roll history. And whatever he did, it wasn't enough. There was, he had Grossman lining him up for more gigs. And, he only knew one way to go 100%. And, with whatever drugs he had to take to keep him going, who knows exactly what was happening. But,
if I may interject here, I'm curious, why were people booing him? Why would somebody pay to go in to boo the guy?
It's a good question. It seems silly looking back at it now, but it was, he was the stand bearer of the folk movement. He was iconic to the protest movements. and people wanted him to be the way they wanted him to be. He just wanted to play music and create visionary music. That was really his goal in life, not to represent a protest movement. But people saw him as what they wanted to see him, and they saw relentless, the booing, the electric. He went on electric, but it was even before that. When he stopped doing protest songs and just started singing, great acoustic songs, nobody was able to accept the changes. But he never gave up. He was a visionary. He stuck to his gun and pursued his passion.
Well, when Martin Luther King had done the March on Washington, if you go back on YouTube, you can watch. It was actually opened by Bob Dylan and Joan Baez before Martin Luther King came out and made a very famous speech that Dylan was, at times under the pressure of standing up for the civil rights movement and writing anthems that were making him so synonymous with it that, the people who were small-minded and hated, took a lot of vitriol out on him. And I guess that was a lot of pressure for a young fella, I would say. Well, wouldn't you say that, Howard?
Yeah, definitely. But he tapped into the consciousness of what was going on. But he didn't want to be the leader. He understood. He always had a great mind for understanding a scene, what was happening at a time. But he never proposed to have the solution. He never wanted to be the guy, carrying the flag, and he just wanted to reflect the times. He was just hip. He had a great feel for what was going on in the country, and it's not necessarily more than anything. I think Bob Dylan always wanted to have a crowd to play for and be loved as a musician more than as a protest leader or some kind of guru.
Okay, I was talking to my friend today, Andy Muir, who has a book on the Never Ending Tour out, and also one called Razor's Edge and one called Troubadour. And I was talking to him about your book. He was impressed by it. And I asked him for a quote that I could bounce off you for a little of your thoughts. And I asked Andy what he thought of Dylan playing with the Dead and the album that came out. And he playfully sort of pointed out, he said, in my book, they picked just about the worst possible collection of tracks for the LP. Despite my overall misgivings, a wonderful, or at least much improved LP could have been produced if they had chosen the correct songs and performances. I really don't think it would ever work, though, an out-and-out individual and a communal group, which is rife for disaster, to say nothing of the drugs on the tour. Now, he was harsh on the released album, and I don't think he liked the overall. I think there was some good stuff in it, especially like the rehearsals. But just to bounce off what Andy playfully said, and he also, spoke up on your works, he enjoyed them. What do you think of that? The songs that they actually picked for that album, and the songs on the tour, and the rehearsals, if you can mesh that together.
Sure. I just want to say Andy's book on the Never Ending Tour was great. It kind of inspired me to be a writer. It kind of helped me get into writing and said, hey, that's what I want to do. Put my experiences into words, into books. But getting to the Dylan Dead thing, the Dylan Dead album is a travesty. And I love probably more than anybody the Dylan Dead when it worked. But that album, it's just misstrewn lyrics. Dylan's off. It seemed like it was almost self-sabotage a little bit. According to several sources, the Grateful Dead liked the Giant Stadium show from July 12, 1987. And it was a spectacular show. It's the greatest concert I've ever seen in my life. It's that good. And Garcia had a great night. Dylan was fired up. First performance of Wicked Messenger. Did a great Joey. If they would have taken that show, released it as an album, I think people would have really liked it. I can't say they went nuts over it. I went nuts over it. They did have great moments, the Dylan and Dead, but unfortunately that album doesn't match it. But the one song that I love, Dylan Dead album, which I think is the best part of it, is I Want You, from Oakland on July 25, 1987. It's a shame, I think, in the future, if Dylan Bootleg people are looking to put out a relevant thing for the Bootleg series, the Dylan Dead thing, where they take songs from Giant Stadium, maybe some of the rehearsals, some fantastic stuff in the rehearsals, like Way in the Bubble by Paul Simon, Johnny Cash tune, also Prisons in there, and a couple of Buddy Holly tunes. I think they can make a really nice bootleg release and make amends for what was a pretty cool experiment that at times didn't work out.
Yeah, I think that, it definitely had its moments. Even on the album itself, I like the opening track. I like the way they performed Slow Train and such. But it was a disappointing release overall. But when they got together now, Dylan had put out Empire Burlesque, and he was kind of waning and looking for his place. He didn't really seem to have a place in the 80s, as talented as he is. The Dead, on the other hand, were touring, and in your book, in Dylan and the Grateful Dead, I was taken by how much they were raking in on touring. And how did it come about that they found each other then to get together and tour together?
Yeah, well, 1986 was the year that Dylan and Garcia kind of bonded as friends. They knew each other beforehand, admired each other. Obviously, Garcia covered a ton of Dylan tunes, but they became friends after a Greek theater show in 1986. I mean, they really bonded. And they toured together in 1986, and but it was a tough time for Dylan, and he did a movie Hearts of Fire where he played this guy Billy Parker, who was a washed up old rock and roll star, and Dylan really felt like that at that point in his career. So he almost wasn't playing the part. He really was in a weird way. Billy Parker, he just released his least selling album, Knocked Out Loaded, which was right after Empire Burlesque. So it was a tough time for Dylan. He was trying to find himself in the 80s. And on the other hand, the Grateful Dead, they were like, coming of age. Garcia had just bounced back from a coma and in late 1986. And they came out with their first album in 7 years, In the Dark, and the hit song Touch of Grey. And all the momentum was like, for the first time, was in their ballpark. And they were drawing bigger crowds than Bob Dylan. It was incredible. A band that really hadn't had nearly as much commercial success or notoriety as Dylan. They had built an incredible underground following, and it was weird. Dylan was looking at it, and he thought it was kind of cool. It was something that was authentic going on in the 80s, where he looked at the rest of the world in the 80s and the music world with the MTV and all that, and he just didn't see how he fit. And I think he saw the Grateful Dead thing, and he said, that's kind of like where I would like to be, kind of doing something like the Grateful Dead are doing. Now, of course, Dylan's the type of guy who would never, he would never completely copy what somebody else is doing, but he kind of took the ideas from touring with the Grateful Dead and eventually put them forth into his own never-ending tour. So his time with the Dead was, very valuable, and it helped reshape the second part of his career.
Now, that was a really interesting part of your book, but one thing I just want to go back a little bit and digress. I didn't know, and I thought it was very interesting. I believe you said it was 1972 in the book at the Brooklyn Academy of Music that Dylan was talking with Levon Helm, and Helm said to him, when are we going to go out on the road again? Most of our fans know that would be with the band. And Dylan said, I might tour with the Dead, I'm paraphrasing. Can you tell us a little more about that? I thought that was really, and that was way back in 72, I think.
Yeah, it was 71, New Year's Eve. And I wish I was a fly on the wall for that, because I think it took a lot of people by surprise, because nobody knew that Dylan was into the Dead at that point. But he first saw the Grateful Dead in 1971, and he just saw something about the Grateful Dead. It must have been Working Man's Dead. That must have been the thing that turned them on. Working Man's Dead had that John Wesley Harding band type sound to it, where the Grateful Dead finally, with Robert Hunter, brilliant songwriter, created something that was very Dylan-esque and sounded like a band. So I think that drew Dylan's attention, and he just, right away, he was always kind of a Deadhead. The second he heard the music, heard what they were doing, he was like, that's a cool scene. He thought that to himself, and I think he really didn't mean, I don't think he really meant that in 1971. It's something he probably just shot out, but he said it, and eventually it happened.
Another thing in your book that really I found fascinating was when you said Dylan had asked, like I heard rumors of it, but you flush it out a bit. Dylan had asked to join the Grateful Dead. And the way you portray it in the book is really interesting. Can you tell us about how during this Dylan thought of joining the band and what happened?
That's it's really mind-boggling story because he did it on February 13th, 1989. It was the day after he played, came on the second dead. And at this point in his career, he was staging a comeback. He started the never-ending tour. He had a very successful first year. The traveling over, he was a hit album. Everything he seemed to have, a lot of momentum. So it was kind of weird that he did something like that. But after playing with them on February 12th, he showed up and he came on stage in the second set. And you can watch this on YouTube. It's available on YouTube. He came out between Garcia and Weir. He didn't sing any songs. He just played along. And it wasn't that good of a performance. It wasn't the type of thing where if I was in the band, I would be inspired to say, hey, I'm going to join this band tomorrow. But I think once again, he was still, suffering. He was still looking for to be part of a group because it's a heavy burden being Bob Dylan. Everybody's looking at you when you're on stage. There's no way around that burden. I think he thought he could lose himself in the Grateful Dead a little bit. So he calls up the Grateful Dead office in San Rafael the day after the show, and he made a serious request to join the band. Now the band loves him. Garcia, Bob Weir, they're nuts about him. So it's a vote, and there was one person who voted against it. Bob Weir said it wasn't him. We know it's not Garcia. So it was either Phil Lesh, one of the drummers. Brent was still kind of like the new guy, so it wasn't him. But whoever did it, it was a blessing because while we'll never get to hear what it sounded like with Dylan and the Grateful Dead, Dylan went down to New Orleans and recorded "Oh Mercy" with Daniel Lanois after that, and it sparked a new rebirth for Dylan as a songwriter and a performing artist. So it worked out well. And also the other thing is the Grateful Dead wouldn't have benefited from having Dylan in the band. It would have kind of messed up their flow a little bit, I think. So as much as I would have loved to see it happen for a tour or something like that, actually the best thing that happened was it didn't happen.
Now, at that point, of course, Dylan won a Nobel now and such, and he's probably the greatest rock writer, if not one of the greatest music writers of our time. That being said, as a fan of his at the time, when I'd been to the Giant Stadium show, he was a little off a part of it in my estimation. I still loved being there to see him, but he was, off kilter. And what I'm trying to ask is, at that point, joining an act like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers or the Grateful Dead is sort of a real low risk. I'm going to get an audience built in, and the Dead were making so much money at that time. When he joined, I respect his art immensely, but just on the other side, he's also human. The Dead were raking, I think in your book it said 94 million or something like that. Was he asking for half of the take, or did he just want a cut of the band? Do we know that?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the actual financial aspect of it. I'm sure he raked in the money, and I'm sure the Grateful Dead let him rake in the money because they adored him. It's like for the Grateful Dead, they loved the money. They had a big family to feed, but I'm sure they gave Dylan a healthy cut, and it probably was half, So anyway, it was a great financial move for Dylan, but he got a lot more. He got back 1,000 times more from the experience of doing that with the Grateful Dead. He really found the key to happiness as a performer. To get away from the expectations of having to write the next Blood on the Tracks and just be able to say, hey, I'm Bob Dylan. I wrote all these songs. I'm going to go out and have a good time. I'm going to play my songs, and when the inspiration hits me, I'll work on my next great album. Whenever that comes, I don't have to do anything else. I'm Bob Dylan. I can just go out and play these songs, and at that point, he rediscovered songs that he never took the time to play before. So, it was a great turning point in his life. He became comfortable just being Bob Dylan, the guy who's done so much, the guy who didn't have to keep topping what he did.
Well, he'd been doing this, as you're pointing out, since Kennedy was president and still vibrant in the White House, and to keep doing anything for that long, let alone to 2017, at such a level is incredible. It speaks to the guy's talent. But so a guy who I was afraid would be Howard Hughes and we wouldn't see live again, now all of a sudden he became the road warrior in this never-ending tour. How did the Dead affect his mindset on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of great statements that he made over the years. He's like, if you're a performer, you got to give it your all. And he said he learned that from the Grateful Dead. And I think like, when he was listening to Grateful Dead, over the years, he listened to a lot of great Garcia covers, and he knew Garcia, got to the spirit of the song. I mean, he knew that, and he would hear that, and he would say, "Geez, how does this guy do it?" And he kind of felt that he couldn't do it himself, but it was I think that one of these key turning points. Dylan has a lot of epiphanies in his life. And one of those epiphanies was a concert where he was playing with Petty in Locarno, Switzerland. And, he flipped out. He got almost like a panic attack. He writes about it in the Chronicles. He wrote about it in Newsweek. And he was like freaking out. He's in front of 30,000 people. He was trying to sing and he couldn't sing. And then the words came to him. Something, I'm determined to stand. I forget exactly, what he quoted, but it was like, he had that breakthrough, like, I'm a performer. This is what I'm going to have to do. It's, God gave me this gift, and, this is who I am. He came to terms with, I'm Bob Dylan, the performer. It's almost like he made a pact with the devil or something, and from that day forward, it's did him well. He's just, you got to keep on keeping on, like a bird that flew, and that's what he's done since that time, and more so than he ever really did it early in his career. Now he's really a working man's troubadour.
Well, I thought he did some interesting gospel songs while he was with the Dead, and especially some of them were in the rehearsals. And, hearing those recordings were good. And I thought when I was at the show, I thought Slow Train worked well. But I think you alluded to Change My Way of Thinking in the rehearsal. It's definitely in the book. Shot of Love, Slow Train. I thought that wouldn't be one of the things I expected beforehand, but in the tracks I've listened to, I thought his gospel songs played very well into With the Dead. I thought it was Shot of Love, and those songs sounded pretty good. Did you like those?
Yeah, it's like it was these fresh songs that he had just created that he hadn't overplayed, and he heard Garcia's love for it, and he kind of got caught up in the rapture of it. Gonna Change My Way of Thinking. It's a phenomenal version. Garcia's guitar licks are incredible. And Dylan, at the time he was doing the rehearsal with the Dead, he forgot the lyrics, but it didn't even matter. He was singing with such passion. And he definitely, that was part of the thing, discovering the songs that he just written. He had a tendency to write so much that he would just, he would write something and it would be done with it, and he'd walk away from it. But, Garcia was like, hey, check this out, man. This is a great song. Let's dig into this. And the gospel stuff, he did, great stuff.
When I was talking to a friend of mine, and, in the story, he just told me Dylan shared with him that he'd been getting mail, from fans when he put out some of the gospel albums. And some people liked it, or some people tolerated it if they weren't particularly into it. But he had been showing them letters he got from people where it was some real hate letters and stuff, and he had been hurt by it. And he, some of the letters actually called him a Nazi. And I was just wondering, a sensitive guy in a sense, and also a tough guy, a complex guy. I was just wondering what you thought of some of the reaction that you allude to in the book about when he did the gospel period.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Dylan's always been a guy who's written from his heart, formed from his heart, and a lot of people thought he was phony, not authentic. Christians said he was doing it for the money, he was taking advantage. Jews said he was a phony. Here was a guy who had an epiphany in his life, another epiphany. It lasted a couple of years, but when something hits his heart and he wants to write about it, he goes in 100%. He doesn't care what anybody says, and that's why Bob Dylan is who he is. Whatever he goes for it 100%, and and people expect him. Once again, they want him to be just like he is, and whatever that line from Maggie's Farm is. But he's always himself, and in that period, he was really authentic, and people came at him hard. But it was a period that lasted. He definitely turned to Jesus to kind of escape something in his life, but it was authentic. There was nothing phony about it, and the music was all heartfelt. And I think it was just another time where fans and critics, stabbed him for no reason. He wrote some great music, blessed us with great music, and I think it's 100% authentic what he did.
Yeah, I think he took a risk because, the people who said, I think Ronnie Hawkins, the fellow who used to play with the band when they were the Hawks, he said, oh, Dylan's doing this to get attention, but really by the time he put out Shot of Love, he'd really alienated a lot of people and took a risk with that. If anything, he was hurting his sales, even though I think the music stands up and he put out some good, really solid gospel shows. But I think he took a lot of abuse from the critics, and a large part of his fan base was actually alienated. And one of his big supporters, not somebody who is booing him, like, he's been so controversial. Bart asked before, why did they boo him? Well, that one time was initially when he went from acoustic to electric music, when they thought he sold out, to his principles of social activism. Then in the Christian period, he really took some hard knocks. People always seem to be looking to write him off, but Jerry Garcia always seemed to be one of his biggest supporters. I love the way you portray that in the book. Could you talk about some of your favorite covers Jerry did of Dylan songs?
Yeah, that's easy for me to do, because Garcia just had this ability to see the beauty in the music that sometimes, like a brilliant writer like Dylan, Garcia could see things in there that that Dylan would put out a song, and for instance, when you go to Planet Waves, I mean, there's beautiful, beautiful love songs there, and Garcia, Tough Mama. Garcia, he played with a band, Legion of Mary, John Kahn, Ron Tutt was in the band, Merle Saunders, they had a sax player, Martin Fierro, and they did these lush, beautiful instrumentals of Tough Mama, rock and roll, really caught the spirit of the song, where Dylan kind of always rushes through things, even if it works and it feels good. Garcia slowed everything down. It's like he took a magnifying glass to everything Dylan did. And he really got into the essence of the songs. He did "Going, Going, Gone." He did a great version of that. The "Blood on the Tracks." He did several versions on that. Highway 61, between Garcia Band and the Dead, they covered 6 of those songs. So Jerry just it's like if as Dylan fans, we love Dylan, and if we could do worthwhile covers, we would be out there doing it. Garcia just he got the pulse of the song. He even sometimes got things that Dylan didn't even see in the song, and he took it patiently. He was a very patient player, listened, and he found the beauty within the song, slowed it down. And to some extent, that's, sometimes Dylan fans have trouble understanding the Grateful Dead or the way Garcia plays, because he's a very patient, slow player who really, digs into it. But, that's the beauty of what he does, and Dylan always recognized that. I think the first great cover that Dylan heard he was really impressed with was the Positively 4th Street from Live at Keystone back in 1973.
One that always got to me, could you comment on? One of my favorites that maybe exceeds the Dylan version, or at least equals it, would be When I Paint My Masterpiece.
Yeah, it's another song where Dylan he had so much to say, threw it out there on that acoustic version. Garcia slows it down nice and easy. There's several beautiful versions from early in their career. Garcia Band, just a lot of great slow versions from Garcia. He played it acoustic, he played it electric. And then the Grateful Dead, after they toured with Dylan, Bob Weir fell in love with the song. And when the Grateful Dead played, Bob Weir did a version of When I Paint My Masterpiece. And it's always like they would take the after a verse, they would play an instrumental, and it'd be like the instrumental would reflect on what Dylan just on Dylan's lyrics, and it brought more depth, more resonance. The streets of Rome, filled with rubble, and Garcia would just play it on the guitar and just let it resonate, and you'd be like, wow, you'd be like, hey, this is an incredible song. And the Grateful Dead, Garcia, they gave you time to really soak in the majesty of the song. And by the way, Garcia did a much better version than Bob Weir. Weir did a good version. It was kind of like Dylan's version, but Garcia did much better When I Paint My Masterpiece, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I like the Weir version, not putting it down, but yeah, I think the Garcia version excelled. On the album Street Legal, that wasn't initially right in the book received well, but I think when they did the remaster of it and the lyrics of it, and the music behind it, I think he had a really good sax player who was originally put down for being, quote, Vegas. Steve Douglas, I think his name was. I thought it was a good album, but the song that got me that Jerry redid that really sticks with me was Senor. What are your thoughts on that one?
Damn, I love that song. It's incredible. And I think it's the moodiness of the song and just, the suspense. I can't take the suspense anymore. And it's an incredible song. And they did a nice job on Street Legal, but Garcia really, really got into it. It's perfect for him. It's very moody. It's got the obviously the Spanish flavor to it. Funny you mentioned it today. Today's we're doing this interview on August 20th, and 14 years ago today I saw Dylan perform Senor at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, and that was Dylan when Dylan plays Senor, you're seeing a great show. It's almost like a trademark of a great show. Yeah, that's a gem of the song, which I think a lot of people missed, when the album came out. But it's grown in stature, part thanks to the great Jerry Garcia band version. But he's found the pulse of himself, playing it live years later.
Another part of the book that got to me that I enjoyed very much is when I went to Live Aid, and I had an awful experience in the 100-degree heat. Being sort of light-skinned and blonde, I was burned to a crisp. They called me Robster the Lobster. I don't want to get too much into that, but it wasn't a fun day. I waited all night to see Bob Dylan. He came out, I guess, at about midnight. I'd been waiting for him since the morning, and he came out, and I couldn't even understand a word he was saying in the set. And my friends, we were younger, and, they like to give you the needle. So like, hey, you waited all day for this guy. Smart thinking. They didn't know much about him. They've come to respect him now, of course. But it's kind of a funny story. I don't mean it to have a mean edge. But what happened at Live Aid? How did it lead into Farm Aid, which raised a lot of money for farmers in this country, and a bad thing sort of turned into a good thing?
Yeah, well, it was everything that could have possibly been wrong with the setup, and I was wrong. They were rehearsing "We Are the World" as they were playing on stage. I mean, you got Ron Wood, Keith Richards, the stories out there that they were hanging out with Dylan, doing some drinking. They were feeling no pain when they took the stage, and Wood and Richards they came off as if they had never heard the songs that Dylan was playing. So it was a disaster. There was no way around it. It's kind of cool though that the "Blowin' in the Wind" really isn't a bad version, but Dylan's up there sweating. And to make matters worse, but there was a blessing in this. Dylan mentioned something about maybe taking $1 million or $2 million of the dollars and giving it to the farmers in America, which is a great cause, a noble cause, and it led to Farm Aid. But then again, we're talking about people dying in Africa by the millions, so it may not have been the right place. But if Dylan hadn't said that, there probably never would have been. Well, I shouldn't say there never would have been Farm Aid, but it wouldn't have happened and materialized so quickly. So something good came out of something which it was meant well, but it didn't come off good because of the situation. And just a weird little side note about the Live Aid show. While the rest of the world was watching Live Aid, the Grateful Dead were playing a concert in Ventura, and it happens to be one of their great concerts. And the Grateful Dead were lost in their own world, while We Are the World and Bob Dylan everybody else on the planet was kind of hooked into the Live Aid thing. And a memorable performance, but there was definitely some good came out of it. And any live TV with Dylan is always must see theater.
I'm just interested, people have different personalities, right? And, Dylan's personality at first, as I mentioned before, here's how I would use I'm afraid he's not going to tour again. Then he shocks me, and I think he played, you can tell me the number, maybe it was in your book, but I know he played over 300, 2,500 shows that wound up. And the Dead were on the road so much. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, you saw the band so many times. You can mention how many times you've seen them, and you've seen Dylan so many times. What is it really like on the road day to day for these guys when you do it so much? Is it glamorous? Is it grueling? Is it all these things combined? Just what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, it's what you do, and it's everything. It's glamorous. It's a grind. Hey, like as a writer, I got a full-time job. I got a writer. Every day I go into my coffee shop and I'm writing. Some days I'm enlightened. I think I'm writing something great. Some days I'm just staring at my computer. And it's the same for these guys. They just go out there, do their thing. But when it works, man, it's when you perform live and make great music, it's what better thing? That's like everybody's fantasy, to be on stage to create some amazing live music. And it is interesting. You were talking about the numbers of shows Dylan played with the Neverending Tour. In 2011, I believe he played his 2,319 shows, either 2011, 2012. And in the second half of Dylan's career, he played more shows than the Grateful Dead did in their entire career. unthinkable. If you would have said when he was playing in 1988 that he would go on to play more shows than the Grateful Dead had, unbelievable. So it's just, it shows you work ethic. I mean, Dylan's greatness more than anything. He's blessed. He's a genius. More than anything, he got breaks, but he works hard. And in the second half of his career, his work is playing music live, and he does it with more attitude, more energy than anybody. And it's crazy. But even now, he's played more shows than just in the second half of his career. He played more shows than the Grateful Dead.
Now, again, he became controversial, but I mean, the guy's been at it so long, it seems funny to me that, in his 70s, people will still be waiting for him to stumble and make a mistake so they can write him off or sometimes say something mean-spirited. He does get a lot of accolades. But I was shocked that he put out 3 albums, sort of now, of the Great American Songbook covers. He certainly is entitled to do it. I mean, he's in his 70s again. He's written enough songs, certainly. I was wondering what your own personal thoughts were that he put out 3 somewhat Sinatra cover albums, I might call them, or Great American Songbook albums. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't hold any grudge against it. The music's pretty good. I would much rather hear Dylan originals, to be honest with you, but I don't begrudge him for, he could do whatever he wants, and it's pretty good stuff. But Dylan was in his last few albums that were originals. He was writing cool tunes like By and By and Beyond the Horizon. These beautiful originals that were Sinatra-like and that I loved. So I'd much rather hear him do his own Sinatra-like takes. But it's whatever. Dylan's given us so much. Whatever he wants to do, that's cool. It doesn't matter if I'm not nuts about his new albums, which I'm not. But I like him, and I'm just waiting for that next batch of originals. It's going to come to him. My prediction was 2019. He's going to blow us away again with a new album of originals.
And I enjoyed his last one, Tempest, but I wanted to say my friend Doug Alexander turned me on to your books, and he's got a page on Facebook, Jehovah's Favorite Choir, and I have one on there called Bob Dylan Temples and Flames, and I'm going to put your books up on there and advertise them because I enjoyed them so much. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you'd like to tell us, and maybe Bart has something he'd like to ask you as well?
Yeah, no, man, this is great. I could go on all day talking about this. So but there's so much stuff with the Grateful Dead. The legacy of the Grateful Dead, how Jerry's not been with us for 22 years, and the music's almost like taking off more than it ever has, and it's really incredible, the legacy. And obviously Dylan's still out there, doing it, so there's no problems there. It's just that the lasting legacy, we can't get enough of it. Jerry's the most alive dead person out there in the history of the world, so it's what they've done is amazing. And since you mentioned my books, I could spend the next 20 minutes reading the titles of my books. They're pretty long. But I've done 6 books. I've done a Tangled Up in Tunes, Ballad of the Dylan Head. It was a memoir. That was my first book, and that was really semi-writing. And I got a Positively Garcia, Reflections of the JBB, all about the Jerry Garcia band. And all these are available on Amazon. I did one book on the Grateful Dead, 1977, one of the most ballyhooed years in their history. So, I'm definitely hooked into writing about these guys, and I don't see any end in sight. They're the 2 biggest, individual artist musical genres out there, and it's a blessing to be able to do this. It's a blessing to be on this show and have people ask me about it, buy my books, read them. It's it's the least I could do for these guys. They, Garcia and Dylan have brought so much into my life. This is my way of thanking them.
Well, I think you did, you did a fine job with the books. I want to read your other ones too that you just mentioned. I'd like to get into them because I like both the books that I have, but Dylan and the Grateful Dead is one of my favorites. And you mentioned another one there I didn't know of yet about Garcia. I'm going to get into that one next, I think. Bart, do you have anything you'd like to add and ask our guest?
No, I think he did a great job, and I asked the one question about his controversy, and I thought you answered that very well. Appreciate you being on the show, and you're an excellent speaker there, Howard. So I'm sure you're an excellent writer as well.
Thanks so much for being on, and also Live Music should run an article that I'm writing about your books. So when I have that, I'll send that over to you as well. And I thank you for being on, and I also honestly thank you for an enjoyable read. I really enjoyed the Dylan and the Grateful Dead book, and there's not too many. Some of the books I treat as picture books. I like the pictures, I don't like the text. But in your book, I like the words, and I enjoyed them so much. I thank you for that.
Well, hey, like I say, it's a pleasure doing it. And Bart and Bob, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bob, what would you say is Bob Dylan's religious perspective?
Well, I think he'd always been a guy that was searching, and people were interested in searching. And some of the fans wanted to come to a conclusion. And I think some just want to be on a search and not come to the conclusion. But, Dylan came to Jesus in a big way. And about 1979, and he actually said, this is his quote, "Jesus tapped me on the shoulder." He said at another point the room he was in shook, and said, "Bob, why are you resisting me?" I said, "I'm not resisting you." He said, "Are you going to follow me?" I said, "I've never thought of that before." He said, "When you're not following me, you're resisting me." And after that, Dylan's life changed quite a bit, and he put out 3 records called Slow Train Coming, Saved, and Shot of Love, which were overtly Christian albums, but really in all his work, if you read the lyrics since then, his last album, Tempest, from a couple of years ago, is all about the book of Revelation. And he had quite an astounding effect on me, and I think other people. Part of my conversion was I heard the Saved album and I held it in my hands. And in those days we had those vinyl albums, I held it up and I prayed and I said to God, I don't know if this is true at that point. I said, if this is true, please tell me I want it. And that was a big part of the way I came to Christ.
Well, we're both believers, and one of the things that the scriptures say is that as the world becomes corrupt, the world makes what is evil good, and what is good evil. They make what are lies truth, and they make what is truth lies. So me, not knowing really much about Bob Dylan, other than he wrote Blowin' in the Wind, and I like folk music a lot, and I know a little bit more about Simon or Garfunkel than I do Bob Dylan, I had heard that he worships the devil, which is really interesting because if you're right, what a surprise that the world teaches the exact opposite of the truth. And let me show you what the world does to prove their point of view that they believe Bob Dylan worships the devil. You probably know this clip from 60 Minutes, and I'm going to play it right now.
Why do you still do it?
Sure.
Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I made a bargain with it, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And this earth, and then in the world we can't see.
So it's really interesting. All these websites show this clip, and they say this is proof that Bob Dylan worships the devil. Which, if you put that scary music in the background and you're told that in advance, you can kind of see how that seems to say that. But he never says that. In fact, what he is saying is that he worships God. It says that he worships the creator of the universe, which is actually God. And that his pact is with God, with Jesus, to do music that have lyrics that are biblically inspiring. Isn't that interesting?
Well, I think, it's funny you pointed out, you're in production and stuff, you have more experience than me, but they had that music in the background. But there was an old thing with musicians where they would say, like, Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil. I think what Dylan was sort of doing was backflipping that there and saying, I sold my soul to Jesus, and he said in another quote earlier, I want all my songs to be scripturally correct. So I think sometimes good people want to find bad things to expose them. And sometimes we get a little zealous. And, with Dylan, I think they took that quote with pliers and made a lot out of it. But they asked him after that again in an interview with Bill Flanagan. He put out a Christmas album. And Dylan comes from a Jewish background, and a lot of people have gotten, angry at him for that. And Bill Flanagan says, on this Christmas album, which was a more, semi-recent one, he said, you sound like a believer. And he said, I am a believer. And then when he was winning the Nobel Prize and made a speech, he made it a point to say when he made his last record, he thought of making another gospel record instead, because that's nothing new to him. And I think that was his way of saying to the people who saying he lost his faith or he moved on, he does still believe. And his last album, Tempest, I said, if you listen to just the lyrics, if you don't even like the music, if you just read the lyrics, it's all about the book of Revelation. And from a good standpoint, where God wins, not trying to say it gets twisted like some of these heavy metal people who I pray for, and I hope they have an epiphany too.
Yeah, so that's pretty profound, isn't it? That this guy who's a rock and roller, is a Christian, but he doesn't really promote it as such, and the world twists it around to discredit him, and says he follows the opposite. In fact, that was the very accusation they made against Jesus. They said he is a worshiper of the devil. Can you imagine that? The Son of God, they accused him of being the worshiper of the devil. It looks like they're doing the same to Dylan. In fact, Jesus prophesied that if you follow him, the accusations that were made against him will be made against you as well.
And I guess in a sense it's an honor, but it's never fun to be slandered. But when God, brings it out and shows the light, on who we are because of Jesus, it's a relief sometimes. But there's just a little quote that he put out in 1985, and I think it's pretty straightforward. He said, they'll see that God is coming. Somebody representing him will be on the scene. Not some crackpot lawyer or politician with the mark of the beast, but somebody who makes them feel holy. People don't know how to feel holy. They don't know what it's about or what's right. They don't know what God wants of them. They'll want to know what to do and how to act, just like you want to know how to please any ruler. They don't teach that stuff like they do math, medicine, and carpentry. But now there'll be a tremendous calling for it. There will be a run on godliness, just like now there's a run on refrigerators, headphones, fishing gear. It's going to be a matter of survival, and I've heard you say that on your show, pretty much in other words maybe, but it's going to be a matter of survival, what we believe in, to get on that arc of belief in Jesus Christ. And Dylan really has put out a strong witness, and I guess the slander against him is to his credit when he endures it, but he's a human being like all of us, but I think he put out a witness that helped bring me to Jesus, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, here's the scripture I have by my desk here. It says, "Blessed am I when I am persecuted for doing right, for this makes my destiny the kingdom of heaven. Blessed am I when for doing right I am insulted, falsely accused, and spoken hatefully of. For in the same way the prophets who preceded me were also treated. Rejoice, for I will join them in heaven with Jesus."
Amen. And it's funny, another thing Dylan had said is they always called me a prophet, when he was singing songs of civil rights and calling people to live a higher, maybe with a higher moral standing. But it's easy to throw stones and say other people are bad and we're for good, but it's easy to protest. But he said, now that I'm telling them about Jesus, they don't want me to be a prophet anymore. And he never said he was a prophet, he was playing with words. But, I do think that is true, what you're saying. And they did say those things against Jesus, but, thank God the Holy Spirit's with us and he's looking over us and he'll work things out. And I just hope even these people who insult him, their words come back to them and they have a change of heart and they can know how wonderful the love of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is.
Well, you can even take a look at if you're saved, then you can be grateful and dead, right?
Well, one of my favorite things of what you're saying is, it's kind of a scary name, the Grateful Dead. And, but when he played with them, a lot of people did hear those Christian songs like Slow Train Coming, Serve Somebody, Change My Way of Thinking mixed in with the other songs. And that was, maybe the only time they'll hear the gospel or, be influenced that, hey, we look up to Bob Dylan and who's this Jesus he's talking about? So in that, I was very grateful that whole tour happened, because some of those people are, really nice people in a world, in a sense in the world, and they are looking and searching, and hey, somebody's got to tell them, and Jesus said, they said to me, hey, I went and ate with sinners, but that's who needs to be saved. We're all sick, and I'm sick without Jesus, and I need Jesus, and somebody had to come in and get me. I was listening to rock and roll, and Dylan came out with these records, Saved. I picked it up and I said, what is this? The Bible had never really been explained to me well. And because of that, it led me into it. So I'm very grateful for it and very humbled that God would reach out to me, and whatever he uses, I'm grateful for.
Well, if Bob Dylan lyrics led you to Jesus, then he's certainly not a devil worshiper. Well, thank you very much for this great show and very interesting conspiracy. And we just thank you for listening, and stay tuned for our